Well, hi there, and welcome back to Naturally Recovering Autism. I'm your host, Karen Thomas, and thank you so much for being here with us and being a proactive parent and getting these resources that you need to recover your own child from their symptoms of autism. And we know that the definition of recovery is to regain health, and every child's level of recovery is different. But I was now 13 years ago told that my son, when he was diagnosed with autism, could not recover, and that we would basically be managing symptoms the rest of his life, and that we should drug him and maybe try behavioral therapies. But fortunately, my background as a craniosacral therapist and in holistic health led me to believe that the brain could heal, and I wanted to find out what the causes were of my son's symptoms, and instead of masking it with dangerous drugs. And I wanted to see if I could help him get better. And fortunately, like you, I was out there researching and doing my due diligence, and it took me over a decade. But I figured it out, and today my son is fully recovered. And I like to share the resources and weekly interviewing experts like on this show, but the resources that I use to recover my son. And I've wrapped it up in a sense for you in a free workshop video that I've created so that you can understand really the 4 stages and overall what's necessary in recovery. And the 4 stages are, first is you've got to heal the gut and all that implies. 2 is natural, safe, heavy metal detoxification. 3 is clearing the co-infections like mold and Lyme and strep. Those are a big deal in autism and often overlooked, or they're not worked with properly. And then stage 4 is brain support and repair. So you can get my free workshop. It's an online video workshop, and it's the link for that is naturallyrecoveringautism.com/free workshop. So please go ahead and get that and kind of get the understanding of what is necessary for autism recovery. And if I can help you on your journey, I'm happy to do that. I do that with many people around the world today, and it gives me great satisfaction to see other kids recovering from these resources. And today's show is another one that's going to be very helpful for you, because we know our children with autism have a lot of digestive problems. They have trouble digesting proteins and fibers, and their gut isn't working well. And so we need to build our enzymes, and we don't have enough usually because of these digestive disturbances and other things that are going on. So we have with us today a very special guest who is a specialist in enzyme therapy and enzymes for autism and enzymes in general. And his name is Dr. Devon Houston. And you may know of him from Houston Enzymes, his company. And everything that we will do, as usual, I have created a show link for you for the episode today, so you can get all the show notes at naturallyrecoveringautism.com/44. Just the number's 44. And so again, I'll link to the resources we share today in case you're driving or you're out on a walk or you missed something as we were speaking. You can jump back to that page for you. So I'm going to give you a little background on Dr. Houston. He is the incorporator and CEO of Houston Nutraceuticals. He's obtained a bachelor's degree in biology from Hendrix College in 1979. He was awarded a Bachelor of Science degree in medical science in 1980 and a PhD in biochemistry from the University of South Alabama College of Medicine in 1987. Dr. Houston's graduate work focused on how the aging process affected certain enzyme systems. Following the defense of his thesis work, Dr. Houston accepted a postdoctoral position at the University of Virginia, where he became involved in several fields of research, including ligand receptor integrations of the adenosine receptors, diabetes, and mechanisms of how cells respond to environmental signals. Dr. Houston's work was funded by the American Heart Association, and then in 1990, Dr. Houston accepted a position at St. Louis University School of Medicine. While there, he obtained the position of assistant professor in the Department of Pharmacology and Physiology. His research focus was on characterizing the cannabinoid or marijuana receptors as a possible model for Alzheimer's research. Dr. Houston's work was funded by several grants from the National Institute of Health, and he has published several peer-reviewed papers as well as presenting his findings at several symposia. In 1997, Dr. Houston left academia for industry and accepted a position as manager of research and development at National Enzyme Company. And in March of 2000, Dr. Houston left National Enzyme and became a scientific consultant to the dietary supplement industry prior to funding Houston Nutraceuticals Incorporated and doing his business as Houston Enzymes, which I know and I have used and still personally use daily. I actually took some this morning. Dr. Houston has multiple enzyme formulas for specific needs, and I have found them to be very, very helpful. I found Dr. Houston in my research when I was researching for my son's recovery over a decade ago, and I've actually written about him in my book, Naturally Recovering Autism, so you can learn more about the enzyme therapy in there as well and enzymes that are used. But I'd like to now welcome Dr. Houston. So thank you so much for being here with us today. I appreciate it.
Hi, Karen. It's my pleasure to be here.
There are a lot of parents listening in that, might not really be aware of, maybe some are starting at square one. What do enzymes do for us? Why wouldn't we have enough? Why would we even need to be supplementing, and especially our children with autism? So maybe you could start from the beginning.
Okay. Well, when you say the term or the word enzymes, that's actually a very broad subject. So we're going to narrow that down to just the enzymes that are involved in digestion of food. So what an enzyme is, it's a specialized protein that causes chemical reactions to occur that otherwise would not occur under conditions suitable for life. So in simple terms, this enzymes cause things to happen, and they make reactions go quicker, and they make them more possible without having extreme temperatures or conditions. And in digestion, it's what we use to convert raw material or food into the nutrition that the body needs to make muscle, to develop anything, the compounds, anything that's protein or neurotransmitters, hormones, just anything you can think of. And there's probably over 5,000 enzymes in the body that we know of, and probably that many as well that we haven't found yet. So enzymes are very important, and it's not a matter of whether proteins, we are deficient in protein or an enzyme. It may be more so where we move the site of that enzyme's action, and that's really where enzyme supplements come into play.
There are a lot of things like, our kids have, especially children on the autism spectrum and adults. I mean, there's the question we'll raise eventually of, hydrochloric acid as well. But our children definitely have trouble with protein synthesis, protein digestion, and carbohydrate and fiber digestion. All of these being different types of digestion that they're not being supported. Their body isn't supporting those. So I'd like to we have to take a quick break here, but when we come back, I'd like to kind of delve into some of those pieces because I know that there are certain, like fiber is so necessary and important for us, but our bodies sometimes aren't able to digest it properly, especially kids with autism. So I think that would be helpful for parents to know, as well as definitely the protein issue, which is a big one, especially with things like gluten and casein. So we're going to take a short break right here. You're listening to Naturally Recovering Autism. I'm your host, Karen Thomas, and today we're talking about enzymes for autism with Dr. Devon Houston. Stay with us. Hi there, and welcome back to Naturally Recovering Autism. I'm your host, Karen Thomas, and today we are talking about enzymes for autism, and we have Dr. Devon Houston with us. If you missed the beginning of the show, I have created a page for you where I will link to some of the things that we're talking about in today's show notes at naturallyrecoveringautism.com/44. And Dr. Houston, I'm wondering, a lot of parents will be curious why our kids, especially kids with autism, why they would be deficient in enzymes. I know as we age, we get deficient, but some of the things that cause the kids to become deficient, and I know it has a lot to do with a poor gut, their gut not being healthy.
Well, yeah, we have to be careful about that word deficient. I think what we're dealing with a lot of kids on the spectrum is that they deal with gut inflammation. And inflammation is simply injury. So when you have injury to the gut, and those cells within the gut wall are the cells that produce digestive enzymes, then you're injuring cells that produce the enzymes, and therefore you may not be getting certain enzymes. And there are, in the medical literature, there is evidence, I think from UMass and Boston General, where these kids' gut walls are so damaged that they're lacking in certain enzymes for carbohydrate breakdown. So as a result, they suffer not only lactose intolerance, but they just can't break down other starches. And what this results in is that the bad bacteria and yeast feed on those unbroken starches. That's a food source. And so they multiply, produce gas, which can produce bloating and pain and cramping, and actually just make the environment of the gut an inhospitable place for proper food digestion to occur. For other food groups, it's not so much a deficiency of enzymes. Let's talk about protein digestion. I think here it's more the site of where proteins are broken down. And most of the digestive action in the body occurs in the small intestine after the food has moved from the stomach into the first part of the small intestine where it encounters the pancreatic enzymes. But the thing to remember here is that once food moves into the GI tract, absorption starts occurring, which there's really not much food absorption going on in the stomach. So taking an enzyme supplement, and the thing that makes they have such a large advantage over pancreatic enzymes is the fact that they're acid stable and they can work in the stomach. So they start the digestive process, the breakdown of certain proteins. You talked about gluten and casein. Any other food protein for that matter can now be broken down within the confines of the stomach, and the 2 to 3 hours it takes before the stomach empties the food into the GI tract is plenty of time for these enzymes to do a massive amount of work as far as breaking down foods. So, in some aspects we're talking about a deficiency of an enzyme. In other aspects we're talking about moving the process of food breakdown more upstream into what I call a safer place. In this case would be the stomach. And that allows the breakdown of proteins in a different way so that we don't produce certain peptides that may cause trouble downstream. And so that's really the focus. And I think that gets lost, the fact that these enzymes can work under such a broad pH range, not only in the acidity of the stomach, but also way down into the GI tract. So that's an advantage they have over the pancreatic or animal-based enzymes, which only work in neutral pH. So that's, in my opinion, what makes enzyme supplements so great and provides a lot of interesting applications for future research and future product development.
Well, and it's allowing the food to absorb better because a lot of the nutrition from the foods that our kids are eating isn't getting absorbed. And so they might even remain hungry even though they've eaten a lot, because if they're not getting the nutrition from the food, and hopefully they're getting good food in them, but if even then they're not often being able to absorb that food, so their body and their brain are starving for those nutrients.
That's a good point. Anything that helps break down the meals you eat more thoroughly and more completely, you're going to derive more nutrition, more calories from the food you do eat. So it really doesn't help to eat food. It's really not what you eat, it's what you absorb. So anything that makes food more bioavailable for absorption through the gut, you're way ahead of the curve.
And some people wonder about the, is this overriding your body's natural processes, your pancreatic enzymes that your body would develop? And so could you talk a little bit about that, just to sort of, give some background reassurance that, of what these are doing and how I have read that it does not override the pancreas and alter the body's ability to function normally at creating these enzymes. Sure. If you're taking enzyme supplements.
Yeah, that's not an uncommon question. Really, there is debate in the scientific community or medical community whether the pancreas can detect whether enzymes are present in the system. From what I've read, I don't really see a feedback mechanism to where the pancreas can detect that you're taking an enzyme supplement. So really, you're not overriding or you're not inhibiting your own production of pancreatic enzymes. In fact, the pancreas is always producing digestive enzymes in inactive form, and it stores it in the pancreatic gut. And it's only when if the body senses or the gut senses that the food has moved from the stomach into the small intestine that the pancreatic enzymes are then released. So really, again, the pancreas has no way of determining whether you're taking an enzyme supplement or not, so there's really no feedback mechanism that involves oral or enzyme supplements. So, and I've known people, and myself, I've taken enzyme supplements for over 20 years, 25 years. I've known others who've taken enzymes for 50 or 60 years. And no problems whatsoever. And I always like to say enzyme supplements are probably one of the safest supplements on the market.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And I know that there are a lot of people with, I think, the protein issue, especially with gluten and casein. And I know that there's something called DPP4, and you talked about peptides a moment ago. And the DPP4 is a very specific type of I don't know if it's a formula or a molecule that is in some enzymes, and I know it's in your trienza, that is able to help break down some of these larger proteins, especially like casein, which is in dairy, and gluten, which is in wheat products. So we're going to take a short break right here, but when we come back, maybe we can get an answer to that question a little further to help explain some of the understanding of DPP4 and how it can help break down some of those larger proteins like that. So we're going to take a short break. You're listening to Naturally Recovering Autism. I'm your host, Karen Thomas. Please stay with us. Hi there, and welcome back to Naturally Recovering Autism. I'm your host, Karen Thomas, and today we are talking about enzymes for autism, and we have Dr. Devon Houston with us today. And Dr. Houston is a specialist in this arena, and there is a big link between the gut and the brain. And if you've listened to some of my shows in the past, I've talked about that. I'll link to a specific episode I did with another research and developer and another doctor who some people who have these, give more information on that. But Dr. Houston, I'm thinking it might be helpful if you could just give a brief explanation of that, since we're going into so much about the gut. And of course, absorbing nutrition is crucial, because not only does our body and all of its systems need that nutrition, but our brain does as well. And kids will act out physically and behaviorally, both if they're hurting physically in their body, but also if their brain is inflamed. So we're getting into also the connection between the microbiome, the bacteria in the gut, and how it communicates with the brain, and how the gut can also develop things like brain messengers called neurotransmitters. So you mentioned a little bit about yeast and candida and how it feeds on the carbohydrates that don't break down. So maybe you could go into that a little bit, because I think it has so much to do with that gut-brain connection.
Well, sure. Yeah, for the longest time, we thought communication between the gut and the brain was only from the brain to the gut. And then we started seeing pathways and signaling mechanisms that caused us or made us realize that, hey, some of these messengers were being produced by the gut and being received by the brain. So there's a two-way communication there. And you have to remember that the gut is not only an organ of digestion, but it's also an organ that plays a huge role in the immune system, and it plays a role in how the brain itself is developed early on in life. That's why inoculation of a baby's gut with the mama's bacteria during the birth process is so important to get that initial inoculation of beneficial bacteria to help baby develop. And it's not only for baby to break down the mom's milk or the formula or such, but it's also to feed back to the brain and help it develop as well. So there's some interesting studies. In fact, I was reading one this morning from a university in Australia that was basically confirming the signaling mechanism between gut and brain in children with autism is pretty much definitive. So it's really important. So and remember, you have a balance there. You have the equivalent of bacteria in your gut equal to, as if you're just counting cells, individual cells. You have about 10 people living in your gut. If the human body has a certain number of cells total, well, there's 10 times that amount colonizing your gut. And what bacteria is present there, and there's always an interaction going on between the bacteria, and there's a balance. Every one of us has yeast in our gut. It's just that the majority of us who are neurotypical and are healthy, that yeast and the bad bacteria are held in check by the good bacteria. It's only when you upset the gut or damage the bacterial population that you get an imbalance, and that is the opportunity for bad bacteria to start taking over, or yeast or fungal infections to occur. So it's really important. And it not only happens in disease processes, but if you change your diet, different foods, one way to alter the microbiome in your gut is to change the type of food you eat or go to a different diet. And that always causes some turnover or some change in the balance in your gut. And that's why some people feel uncomfortable when they take on a different diet, where there's a period of adjustment necessary for the gut to get back in balance. Which, by the way, taking enzymes can help with that, because one, you're not dealing with undigested food laying around in the gut. If you're sort of jump-starting the whole digestive process with an enzyme supplement. So, especially with carbohydrates. I know our moms told us not to eat sugar, that sugar causes the bad bacteria to proliferate. Not really so. Sugar is rapidly absorbed out of the gut. Glucose goes out very quickly. But undigested carbohydrates and starches that aren't broken down lay around in the crevices and creases in the gut wall, which become a food source, especially for the gas producers. They multiply rapidly, producing more gas. And there's also a opportune food source for certain pathogenic bacteria and the ones that can cause inflammation. So once inflammation gets a foothold in the gut, then that opens the door for all sorts of things. A thing called leaky gut, which is nothing more than another term for inflammation, but it means that the cell walls or the cells within the gut wall become larger. And so things that would stay in the gut normally now are allowed to escape out. And once in systemic circulation, they can have effect on other systems, including the brain. So that's one importance of trying to keep your gut clean. It's like keeping your house clean. Sweep out the corners, get rid of the dust and the bugs, and maintain a clean house. And things just go much more smoothly.
Right, and enzymes are really helpful when you take them just before a meal, but then they can also be used to kind of mop up some toxins if you take them away from food. They call that the therapeutic use of them. So they tend to do multiple jobs, and they do them safely. And I know we talked a little bit earlier about protein digestion as well, because the carbohydrate piece is so important, and I'm always trying to tell parents, it's not just to be off of gluten and casein. You need to get them off all processed carbohydrates, because they're feeding that bad bacteria in the gut, and as you mentioned, also contributing to the leaky gut in that way. And so I think that when we come back, we're going to take a short break right here. When we come back, we'll talk about the leaky gut and the effect that that gluten and casein have. And then I know that there's a formula called DPP4 that will help with the protein digestion, and especially for gluten and casein, that a lot of parents with autism need to know about as well. So you're listening to Naturally Recovering Autism. I'm your host, Karen Thomas. Stay with us, and we will be right back.
Have you ever wondered why some children recover from their symptoms of autism while others never seem to get any better? After 13 years of research, Karen Thomas has recovered her own son from his symptoms of autism naturally. She now shares how she did it with you in her free webinar so that you can have the right resources and knowledge to help your child. The definition of recovery is to regain health. Karen offers this to you in 4 stages: healing the gut, natural heavy metal detoxification, balancing the co-infections of autism, brain support, and repair. Register now for this free webinar to help you know what you can do to help your child to sleep better, be more calm, improve focus, and reach their fullest potential to live a happy, healthy life. Go to naturallyrecoveringautism.com/free workshop, empowering parents with the resources to naturally recover autism from a mom.
Hi there, and welcome back to Naturally Recovering Autism. I'm your host, Karen Thomas, and today we are talking about enzymes for autism, and we have Dr. Devon Houston with us today, and he's a specialist in enzymes. And when I was in my searches, doing my research to find what I needed to recover my son from his symptoms of autism, I came upon Dr. Houston's research, and I actually have written about him in my book, Naturally Recovering Autism as well. And one of the things that was really important in my findings and when I found Dr. Houston was this enzyme referred to as DPP4. And I'll let Dr. Houston explain that to you, but it's something that is able to help degrade some of these larger proteins like in gluten and casein. Now, I want to give a little caveat to parents listening. That doesn't mean you have licensure to go ahead and give your kids a lot of dairy and wheat products. It's sort of something I found, like if they accidentally get some, or they're at a party and they have a tiny bit to help break it down. But Dr. Houston was one of the first that found DPP4 to be available in commercial enzymes, and I know that he has some updated information on that for us today. So, Dr. Houston, can you share that with us? And first explain what DPP4 is, since I didn't.
Yeah, the DPP Roman numeral 4 basically stands for dipeptidyl peptidase 4. There's a whole family of these peptidases. And a peptidase is an enzyme that just breaks large proteins down into smaller proteins that we call peptides. So, and DPP4 is near and dear to my heart because it's actually what kind of changed my life and caused me to go on the road that I'm currently on and have been for the last 20 years. But I was working at an enzyme manufacturer, and we were responding to some questions from a customer as to finding an enzyme that would break down gluten and casein. Gluten is the major protein in wheat. Casein is the major protein in dairy. So it caused me to turn my attention to that project. And I quickly realized, and when they were talking about certain peptides that they were concerned about, glutamorphin in gluten and casomorphin in casein, and years later, we found some other peptides called soymorphin and soy protein. But these, and morphin that added on, glutamorphin, casomorphin, these are opiate-like peptides. And by that, they act like morphine or heroin. They interact with the opiate receptor, which was a type of receptor I was studying in my academic research career. And they actually caused a reaction similar to what opiates, so on a much, much smaller scale. And if you think about it, certain foods that we call comfort foods, like macaroni and cheese, well, there you have gluten and wheat in the macaroni, and you got casein in the cheese. But who doesn't love mac and cheese? And it just makes you feel good. And we notice that with children on the spectrum is they crave certain foods like milk or milk products, crackers, pasta, whatever that's got wheat. So anyway, that got me interested in what these peptides that were being produced during normal digestion, and everybody produces these peptides. It's just that some of the reactions are more noticeable on kids on the spectrum. So the first thing I did was go to the literature and find out these peptides. If our body makes those peptides, it has to have a way of dealing with them. So the medical literature said that there was an enzyme, dipeptidyl peptidase 4, that was the only known enzyme to break down the peptide casomorphin, degrading it completely into an inactive set of amino acids. So that got me curious to look at our stocks of enzymes that we maintained and see if that particular activity, if we could find that in the lab. So we went down the lab, developed an assay, a way to measure DPP4 activity, and we amazingly found very high amounts of the enzyme in these protease blends. So, going back to the customer and telling them this, it was sort of an aha moment for us, or a eureka moment. It kind of explained a lot of the things that we were seeing with children that were taking enzyme supplements and some of their improvements in their digestion and behaviors. So that prompted me to become more and more curious and do more research along the lines of just what that enzyme does. So, and when we made it known, DPP4 is a very interesting, unique enzyme. It's got a large upside, but it has a downside too. It breaks down peptides, but only under a certain rigid set of rules. So the circumstances had to be very exact. And I came to realize that maybe we were asking too much of just DPP4. So another way around the DPP4 is, while it's good, I wasn't going to take the chance to just rely entirely on DPP4. But if you make a cocktail or put in multiple protease activities, you can do pretty much the same thing by breaking down proteins differently than what your own body's enzymes would be doing. So it's like adding an extra set of knives or scissors, chainsaws, whatever, to the whole breakdown process. And when you break down, different proteases break down different peptide bonds, the links that hold amino acids together in proteins. So when you add different proteases, ones that aren't produced in our bodies, then you're adding more tools. And so you're doing two things. You're breaking the proteins down differently in the stomach, which is a safe area because those peptides aren't absorbed in the stomach. So if you break them down, you break down the proteins that produce peptides, or they don't produce peptides because you've introduced these other protease enzymes. So while DPP4 does have a place and it's important, we realize that it's not the only tool in your belt, that there's other ways to do it that are probably more easier to come by. So we rely now on using these and there are newer proteases that have been found in the last few years that we're looking forward to using in future product development.
Right, and there's broad spectrum enzymes like your Trienza formula, I know has the DPP4, and you have to look for it on the label in anything else. I just know that I use the Trienza. My daughter needs it pretty much daily. It helps her immensely, but it's also got the broad spectrum in it, so you're covering, other things with carbs and fiber, digestion, and various things other than just the proteins, which is really nice with that one as well. We need to take a short break right here, but stay with us. You're listening to Naturally Recovering Autism. Hi there, and welcome back to Naturally Recovering Autism. I'm your host, Karen Thomas, and today we are talking about enzymes for autism, and we have Dr. Devon Houston with us. And before the break, I had mentioned broad-spectrum enzyme formulas. Dr. Houston has one called Trienza that has the DPP4 formula in it that I mentioned, or he was just discussing in the last segment about helping break down these larger proteins, but then it has other things in it that help to make it help allow for some carbohydrate digestion and some fiber digestion. But he also has very targeted and very specific ones. One that I know that my daughter needed. I found out she was phenol sensitive, and that helped her immensely. She would break out in hives, and she would get really hyper after certain foods. And I started doing more research, and at the time, many years ago, I found out it was a phenol sensitivity, and you have actually one called no phenol, and it helps also again with the fiber digestion, which is really important. So, what kind of symptoms might a parent look for? And I know a big question that comes up a lot too is about GERD and HCl, hydrochloric acid, so maybe you could touch on that as well. But what kinds of things might parents look for to know maybe what they might want to use if they were using more targeted ones rather than a broad spectrum?
Yeah, this is when I wish everybody had a PhD in enzymes or biochemistry, so it would be a lot easier. But I'll use myself as an example. In med school, I was one of those students that once I hear a disease process, I was pretty sure I had it. So it was rough, but I always knew I had certain GI issues. When I knew I was lactose intolerant, which is normal. Once you hit 30, you're going to have a reduction in lactase enzyme, and that's just normal. When you're about 6 years old, your body assumes you're not nursing anymore and starts shutting down production. Genetically starts shutting down production of lactase enzyme. So we all get lactose intolerance, and we eat cheese or milkshake, and we get gassy and bloating and diarrhea from the lactose being a carbohydrate pulls water into the gut, and that's what causes all the bad stuff to occur. But you can just take a lactase enzyme. So one enzyme, lactase, and enzymes are very specific. They only do one thing. So lactase only breaks down lactose. So you can take that. It's available commercially, has been for years, and take care of your lactose intolerance. So, that's what I did. But then I started having problems with salads and raw foods, again, trying to change my diet, and that made me realize I needed some help breaking down the fibers in food. I had my gallbladder removed a few years ago, and being a Southern boy, I just couldn't break myself from eating fried, greasy foods, and so I needed enzymes to help break down the fats. And so I being me and having the education and experience, kind of knew what to do to adjust to my diet. But a lot of people don't. So here's the thing. Try to keep a journal. See what foods bother you. If you eat a lot of wheat and you find yourself brain foggy maybe, or your gut is hurting. And there seems to be in young people today a lot of problems with gluten intolerance. They don't have outright disease, but that's why with the gluten-free food industry is so large now, so popular. And I don't know what it is with young people, but it's certainly a concern. So if you can narrow it down to a certain food, figure out whether it's protein, carbohydrate, or fat, then you can take the specific enzymes to address that. Now, if you have no idea, you just know that your digestion is bad and anything you eat, well, then you can take what we call a broad spectrum, which contains all the enzymes, all the proteases, the carbohydrates, the fat enzymes, and you can only pack so much in one capsule. So sometimes you have to take multiple capsules, or it's a double lot size horse pill. But you can adjust that way. Now, my preference is to go for the targeted focus enzyme. If you know you have a problem with a certain type of food, go for it. You mentioned the nophenol, which is mostly a fiber-busting enzyme, and it helps a lot with the raw foods, the salads, that type of thing, by breaking down the fibers, not completely, but just enough to where you've solubilized some of that fiber. It gets incorporated into the stools in your gut, in your colon. Helps with elimination better, and it just kind of eases the discomfort in the gut. So things like that, you try to find specifics, and sometimes if you're taking a journal, you may have to eat a food, and it may be 24 to 48 hours later that the problem comes up. So keeping a journal of what you eat, when you ate it, and what happened certain number of hours afterwards can give you an idea of what you need. And that really helps a doctor when you can take that information to your doctor and say, well, here, this is what I've been eating and this is what I've been experiencing. So that's one way you can customize the enzymes to your own particular diet. And let's be honest, enzymes are getting more popular. And just due to supply and demand, enzyme products are getting increasingly more costly to produce and to sell. So if you can narrow it down to just the enzymes you need, it's going to help your financial situation, definitely. But again, if you're not sure, you can just take an enzyme that has all the enzymes. But there are some tricks. You need to be able to know how to read a supplement facts box on the label. So, different amounts of different enzymes, even a small amount of enzyme will do work, but oftentimes to do the thing you need to be done, you need to take a large amount. So those are all things that you need to educate yourself on.
Right, depending on the size of the meal, how much you need, and as you mentioned too, like the nophenol, and I have linked to that on the show notes. But that is, like I said, fiber busting, but it helps loosen the stool. So if kids are having trouble with that digestion, they may be having issues of something like constipation, and so that can help with that a lot as well. So there's some that loosen the stool, and then some that ferment naturally. So if there are some issues going either direction, and then some of these food allergies that are popping up, with people, they can, like the gluten issue, that can be, the enzymes can help the body to break these things down, so there's not as much of a reaction. And as you mentioned at the beginning of the show, ultimately we're looking to help to reduce the inflammation. We're going to take a short break right here. You're listening to Naturally Recovering Autism, and I am your host, Karen Thomas. Please stay with us. Hi there, and welcome back to Naturally Recovering Autism. I'm your host, Karen Thomas. Today we are talking about enzymes for autism with Dr. Devon Houston, and we were talking a little bit about certain targeted enzymes before the break. And one thing that's very important to know is that you want to get a quality product. Now, there are some things, some fillers in some that you would want to avoid. And so, Dr. Houston, maybe if you give the parents who are listening some tips on what kinds of things you would want to look for in a product and what kinds of things you might want to avoid in an enzyme product.
Yeah, the customer really needs to become adept at reading the supplement facts box on a label. When it comes to fillers, some manufacturers realize, and they're not breaking the law or anything, but if a filler is considered part of the manufacturing process, it doesn't need to be listed on the label. Now, we've taken that further, and whatever is in our product, we put it on the label, regardless of whether we have to or not. So we go a little bit further than most. I think it's important to realize that the type of filler, and sometimes we're constrained because manufacturers, we don't have a lot of say in what we can use. Sometimes we do. Maltodextrin can be a problem. We've gone from rice bran, or from mineral oil to rice bran, to now we're just using cellulose, just basically fiber as a filler. And we try to keep the filler to a minimum. If I have space in the capsule when I'm formulating a product, I'll add more enzyme to that. So is to keep the filler as low as possible. But yeah, I think really consumers need to build a relationship with the company that they're ordering from as far as supplements, and we do that. Anybody can email me with a question or concern, and I will be, upfront and honest about it. So I think it just becomes a matter of trust and credibility, and I think with smaller companies, consumers can do that.
And the last thing before we close for the show that I know that a lot of people write into me about, and you mentioned a lot of people ask you about, is should you take hydrochloric acid? And people who have acid backup and what's referred to as GERD. And again, we only have a brief amount of time, but if you could touch on that, because I know that there are a lot of people who ask that question.
Yeah, I do get that question a lot. They ask whether they can take betaine hydrochloric if they're low acid, or what they can do if they deal with reflux and such. Reflux occurs because food is in the stomach, and as long as food is in the stomach, the HCl pumps in the stomach are going to be working. So the thing to do is get the food out of the stomach as quickly as possible. Well, taking an enzyme supplement causes and since it works in the stomach, it's help breaking down the food right there. When it gets to a certain consistency, the stomach will empty. So you can get the stomach to empty quicker. With HCl, a lot of people think they need HCl. You do for the pancreatic enzymes. They require acid to be active. The enzyme supplements are already active. So they don't really care whether there's acid in the stomach or not. They're going to work regardless. So again, I'm not against taking betaine, and if it makes you feel better, then go ahead. But the enzymes won't care. They're still going to be active and do their best regardless.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. And you got that in there quickly because we are getting out of time here. Thank you so much, Dr. Houston, for being here with us today. I really appreciate your time and your expertise. And I've linked to Dr. Houston's some of his information and some of the products that we talked about in this show. All the resources are at naturallyrecoveringautism.com/44, just the numbers 44, for today's show notes. Again, will be there for you. And Dr. Houston, can you give your website real quick for everybody?
Sure. Just Google HoustonEnzymes.com, and that should get you there.
Right. And they're found in most health food stores and online as well. And again, I've linked to a couple that we mentioned in today's episode. Thank you so much for being here with us. I greatly appreciate you being here, getting the resources you need for your children. And stay with us next week. We'll be back again and look forward to seeing you, and have a great week, and stay healthy and happy.